Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts, with hosts Margaret Pickoff and Tim Abbey.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and on each episode, I'm joined by my colleagues on the green industry team as co-hosts. On today's episode, my co-host is Tim Abbey. Hello, Tim.
Good morning, Margaret. How are you?
I'm doing well. On today's episode, we'll be joined by Sam Hoadley from Cuba Center. Before we get to our interview with Sam, we like to start out with a little check-in about what we, your hosts, are thinking about or seeing in the field, or what we're working on at this time of year, which is the second day of February. So Tim, anything new going on in your world?
Well, the big news for today is Punxsutawney Phil has said that spring is coming early, which is fantastic since I'm not a fan of winter.
I had totally...
If you go by those superstitious things.
We, as horticulture professionals, endorse Punxsutawney Phil's decision each year.
Most accurate forecast you can get.
Yeah, well, especially because he's a Pennsylvania native.
Institution.
Magic groundhog. Yeah, well, that's great to hear. It hasn't been too bad of a winter so far, and I've definitely been noticing the days getting longer little by little, which is always nice. I remember last winter, it was so mild. We had a couple days before Christmas that were super, super cold, but the biggest part of the winter was very mild, and hellebores started blooming in mid to late January. There were daffodils coming up by Valentine's Day. So we'll have to see this year what we what kind of approach spring starts to make, but I'm certainly happy to hear that it might be a short winter. We'll see. Great. Well, let's get into our conversation with our guest today. Sam Hoadley is the manager of horticultural research at Cuba Center in Delaware, where he evaluates native plant species as part of the trial garden. So welcome to the podcast, Sam.
Thanks, Margaret. Thank you both for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. We are excited to talk to you, and we just want to start out with the question we usually start out with, which is, can you describe what you do at Cuba Center?
Of course, yeah. So I kind of go big when I start describing what I do. I go back to the mission of Cuba Center, which is to inspire an appreciation for the beauty and value of native plants, and to hopefully inspire conservation action by our visitors, which is exactly what we do in the trial garden. We're evaluating all these various native species and genera for their beauty, for their ornamental qualities, longevity, all of those things, kind of their garden value. So inspiring people by that, the beauty, and then also the value, which is what we interpret as wildlife value. How valuable can these various species and cultivars be to pollinators specifically, which is mostly what we've looked at historically, although we're also looking at measuring their capacity to be host plants. So taking a bigger view of the value to wildlife in this region, and then hopefully inspiring people to see those wildlife interactions in person in our trial garden, see the beauty of these plants, and hopefully inspire people to want to include those plants in their home landscapes.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of questions about the trial itself and how it works, how you choose plants, and how you evaluate them.
Sure.
I'm kind of curious, though, about your background. Can you tell us a little bit about both your, what educational background led you to this, and also personally, what led you into this work?
Yeah, I guess I'll start at the beginning. I kind of grew up in the woods in north central Connecticut, and spent a lot of time with particularly my mom, who I credit a lot of my passion for the natural world to. Knew really early on, weirdly, I had a very linear career path, knew early on what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with plants. Looked at colleges around where I grew up and found a program that I really liked at the University of Vermont. That's where I got my bachelor's degree in sustainable landscape horticulture. Came down to work at Longwood Gardens, where I was for about 6.5 years, working there in various capacities. And I really have always been passionate about native plants, especially their interactions with wildlife. And when I saw this opening at Mount Cuba Center for the trial garden position, I knew I had to apply. I didn't have a lot of research background. It was mostly ornamental horticulture, but I took the shot and somehow lucky enough to be here. And it really is, it's the best job. It's one of the most interesting jobs for me. I get to learn every single day. I get to teach people, which is something I'm passionate about as well. But yeah, that's how I ended up here at Mount Cuba Center.
And when you went through that program at University of Vermont, was that sort of, because I feel like, I mean, native plants obviously have always been popular among a certain segment of the gardening population, but it seems like they're they've kind of exploded as something that everyday gardeners are thinking about, and it has entered into the lexicon of, you know, the average gardener, whereas before maybe it was a more specialized group. But when you were going through that program in sustainable landscapes at UVM, you know, were native plants as big at that point? Did you anticipate that there would be so much interest from home gardeners?
Yeah, it was something that was emphasized. I'm not sure if I really understood how big it would really get and how far we would have come, you know, in the next 10 years or so. But it was starting to build momentum. A lot of like design classes, we were encouraged to use native plants. I had a lot of intersection with the Rubenstein School, so it's a natural resources school up there, in addition to the college of that I was in, which mostly focused on ornamental horticulture and those things. So Rubenstein, there was a lot of focus on ecology, native plant species, dendrology, things like that. So there was a big sustainable spin and also a big focus on native plants when I was there as well.
Well, much to my shame, I have never been to Mount Cuba, and it's only an hour and a half away, so there's really no excuse. And
Sure, we'd love to have you.
So I guess my first question, since we were talking a little bit about research, well, the projects that you have going on there, is it mostly in-house researchers doing that work, or is it outside scientists coming in? I know I was reading a little bit that like Doug Tallamy from the University of Delaware has at least one project there.
Yes. So a lot of the trial garden research is in-house. We have worked with some universities, particularly University of Delaware, to kind of get that next level of data, especially when we're looking at wildlife interactions. And I can see us doing a lot more of that in the future. There are other research projects that go on that are beyond the trial garden, in which we do have several active partnerships going on. We're a relatively small organization, and I think one of our strengths is that we can work well with others. And, you know, to achieve a common goal.
When it comes to like data collection for your different projects, are you like yourself and staff doing all of that, or do you also have like a volunteer network who you've trained to help with that?
Yeah, so both. So the horticultural data, you know, ornamental qualities, it's really myself and my coworker Laura Riley, who are doing a lot of that horticultural evaluation. We're giving the plants ratings, we're making the observations, generally on a weekly basis. Generally from May to about September, although some trials start earlier or later, depending on the genus we're observing. So we're mostly doing those, the horticultural data. The ecological side, so the pollinator observations, is mostly volunteer driven. And we have this wonderful citizen scientists group that we call the Pollinator Watch Team. It's between 10 and 20 people who are coming in on a daily basis, observing all these plants, counting pollinators, and we could not do that without them. The pollinator watch and the data that they're collecting, I think, is some of the most valuable stuff that we do. I think we've gotten pretty good at telling you whether it's, you know, a good plant ornamentally, But this other side of the coin, this pollinator value, this ecological value, is something that people are more and more interested in. And I find when I'm teaching or giving talks, that's the data that people really want to see. And I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of research still to be done, of course. But they do a fabulous job of at least getting us, an idea about which of these plants can likely attract and then support pollinators in a home landscape.
Since I don't know your overall size for the center, and some of that might be in like woodland that you can't maybe use as a research area. Do you have area to expand? Like if you have like other ideas that come out, you want like, hey, it would be cool to like trial these and do that. I mean, do you have the room to do that?
Potentially, and it's actually something we've started talking about. So the trial garden itself is actually inside the core gardens. So it's publicly accessible, which I think is fabulous that people can come and use this space as, an educational resource. And our staff, the public, anybody can come here, see these plants, be inspired by these plants in person. I always tell people, you don't have to wait for the research reports. Come see us, make your decisions right now. Before we even see the results, we're seeing the same things you are. We just have to kind of qualify it with data. But we are somewhat limited in size. The trial garden is less than an acre. We have to kind of be careful about what can fit in there, how much plant material we're bringing in, rotating out, all of that stuff. And sometimes we are a little bit limited by just space. So we have talked a little bit more about potentially expanding our footprint somewhere else in the gardens or in our natural lands to trial things like shrubs or small trees, which I think would be a really valuable thing for homeowners as well. But that's out in the future, and it's something we're very excited about. But to give you an idea of size of Mount Cuba Center, our core display gardens are around 68 acres, and that's all within parking lots, the Copeland House, the formal gardens, trial garden, naturalistic gardens, all of that's within that 68 acres. And then we have about 1,000 acres in our natural lands, which is managed natural area that's taken care of by our natural lands team.
Wow, yeah, it's much bigger than I thought. And I guess one last question here, so I'm not monopolizing things.
Sure, yeah.
How is your deer pressure in that area? Do you have issues with them?
Absolutely. The local deer populations are high. Our core gardens are protected by a deer fence, and there's always, a couple of deer inside, but it's certainly not at the level of pressure that it would be outside of that fence. Outside of the fence, the pressures are high. And in the surrounding areas, they're high as well. But it's one of those considerations that, it's a reality for a lot of us who live in this area. Deer pressure is going to be an issue. And it's something that the trial garden historically hasn't offered a lot of data on, which of these plants would perhaps be more resistant than others to deer browse or mammalian browse of any kind. We always have rabbits that get in and, of course, choose something that I was really excited about to gnaw on. But that's just the way it goes as a gardener, I suppose. But we've actually started working with Temple University. We've been giving them some of our trial material where they've planted that material out in an area that is not protected at all, and kind of observing any kind of deer, rabbit, groundhog preference. Are any of these plants resistant? Any of these plants really favored? So we'll have some of that data for the first time, actually looking forward in our goldenrod trial.
So I want to know just some more of the nuts and bolts of the trial garden. So you've told us it's less than an acre, and it's arranged in such a way that it sounds like it is incorporated very much into the experience of visiting the center. So it's not, separated from the rest of the gardens that people would be enjoying, which I think is really interesting. So like how many species are you looking at? How many genera? How often do those plants, get replaced, or when do you decide to bring in a new genus to start testing? How do those decisions get made?
Yeah, it's a lot of moving parts. So right now we have several trials ongoing. If you were to come to Mount Cuba Center when we open on April 3rd for the season, you would see oak leaf hydrangeas, and we are generally trying to have one woody trial going, generally a shrub, at a time. We started that trend with our wild hydrangea study, our hydrangea arborescens and allies study, which we've now followed with oak leaf hydrangeas. We have those in both our full sun and shade, which I didn't mention, but we have a shade structure as well. So we can evaluate shade-loving plants, and we can also test the tolerances of plants when grown side by side in shade and full sun, which is something we did with the Carex. And it's something we're actually doing with the oak leaves as well. We have a large selection in shade as well as sun. In addition, we have a milkweed trial, a goldenrod trial, a pycnanthemum trial that we just planted that I'm very, very excited about. As far as like pollinator interest, it's going to be amazing. We also just planted a fern trial and a small trial on Tiarella. So there's a lot going on, and there's kind of these blocks that are set up that are on a rotation. Now, most herbaceous perennial trials last 3 to 4 years. I think we're going to start pushing that more into the 4-year range. We really start to see the data become more consistent in year 2 and 3. So a lot of talk has been had about, maybe we allow a single season to allow these plants to get established, get their rhythms back, and then we start really collecting data years 2, 3, and 4. So I think whenever you can extend a trial, make it longer, I think your data is only going to get better. And we start to answer questions like, is this a long-lived plant? Is it short-lived? Where is that kind of cutoff? Once between year 3 and 4, we start to see some of the quote shorter-lived plants kind of drop off. On the woody plants, it's generally a 5 to 6 year evaluation. And there's always everything's staggered. So almost every year something ends and we write a research report on that, and then it's rotated out, and then something new is planted. But the interesting thing to think about is, something has to have been in the works, in the books for at least 2 to 3 years before it's ever planted in the trial garden. A lot of that is purchasing plants. We collect a lot of the seeds for some of these more species heavy trials. And a lot of that is, going out into the wild, collecting these seeds with our partners, getting permits. It's a huge process. Our greenhouse team then grows on those seeds and tries to get the plants to roughly the same stage as the plants that we could purchase in from a commercial supplier, because we'd really like to get those plants at a roughly even footing once we plant them in the trial garden. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of planning, and there's this big complicated Excel spreadsheet schedule that kind of lays out the next, I think, 10 to 15 years about what's going to be in the trial garden, what's going to be rotated in and out for the next several seasons at least.
That's a really interesting aspect that I wouldn't have thought about, that I guess is true in a lot of different plant trials, is being able to evaluate something and have it on, I forget the term you use, but have it, start at the same level as the plants surrounding it. So it's not, disadvantaged in any way that you can control. At the same time, it's good to know, well, this plant usually peters out after the first year. Only half of them survived into the second year. But that does add a layer of complexity to, giving everyone an equal shot so that it can be evaluated in the best way.
Yeah, as best we can. Sometimes it's really challenging, but as often as we can, we try to give things an equal footing at the beginning of the trial. And they're all treated the same, at least for the first season. Our trials, if they're running 4 years, we only water them. We only really care for them for that first year to get them established. After that, it's hands off. Unless there is, an extreme drought. We watered the wild hydrangea trial supplementally one time, I think in 2019, because we were really concerned we were going to lose all the plants because it was just so dry. But other than that, it's very hands-off. We want to see how these plants are doing in very low maintenance situations. We basically want to be promoting plants that people will have very good success with very limited input.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your comments, all these plants are in ground. They're not in containers.
That's correct. Although we have talked about container growing. I know, space is not something that everyone has in their home landscape. Maybe you just have a patio. If you could have a few container plants, maybe what would work best in that situation? Could you keep them over the winter? Those are questions we're looking into as well. I could see us doing some trials on container growing in the future as well.
And do nurseries donate plant material to you, or do you have to purchase?
Some do, although when they do donate, it's with the understanding that those plants aren't given any preferential treatment. We report what we see, and if those plants that are donated don't do well, we'll talk about it. But some are donated, but the vast majority we do purchase, and we try to do it in a very similar way that, any homeowner could, especially for trials that we're looking at, what's commercially accessible. This is what we did with the milkweed trial specifically. We just kind of looked at all the milkweeds that you could, in theory, commercially buy that were maybe somewhat appropriate for the garden conditions in the trial garden, which we consider to be overall average. And I can discuss what, quote, average means in our trial garden. But we would buy those just as any of us could today. We could log on the internet, find these various milkweeds, purchase them in, and grow them in our gardens and just see what happens. We don't try to pull any strings too often, find things that are really obscure. We generally are doing that when we're collecting the seeds for more of a species heavy trial, like we did with the goldenrods or the ironweeds or the pycnanthemum trial that we just planted.
And I mentioned deer as a...
Oh, sorry. There's obviously a big underlying question in the native plant world about, when do you start using cultivars rather than species? And there's a lot of debate about this among my friends, I know, especially the native plant enthusiasts. At the same time, what came to mind with when you mentioned the container, potential container trial for small spaces is I know that there are a lot of kind of, I don't know if they're technically dwarf cultivars, but something like Joe Pyeweed, there are these cultivars that, stay 2 feet tall rather than 11 feet tall.
Right.
So as someone who lives in a small space and has a very small patio, I personally see the value of that. But how do you make those decisions about, obviously you can go to a big box store and many of them will have native plants for sale, but they are usually cultivars. Sometimes they, you had talked in a previous podcast episode I listened to about the Echinacea purpurea, and there's all these different cultivars, some of which don't resemble the native species at all. And so I guess I'm wondering what the decision-making process is like there. Are you mostly looking at what is most available to the average consumer and testing that? Or are you specifically, you had mentioned there are certain trials that are more species heavy. So how do you make that decision between using cultivars and just straight species?
Sure. So the trial subject, in a way, makes that decision for us. For goldenrods, if you were to look at all the commercially available goldenrods, there's only a handful of cultivars out there and hybrids. And a lot of what you get is straight species. Now, a lot of times it's not going to say, where that genetic material originally came from, which is kind of one layer removed from the people who would really want local genetics, straight species. But we try to, as often as we can, going forward, especially, we're really interested in comparing local genetics of a straight species, unknown genetics. We don't know where that plant came from, as well as the cultivar. So we want to have those 3 layers as often as we possibly can for comparison, both from an ornamental perspective, and we're really, really interested in knowing what the pollinators are doing, which of these plants are attracting the most. I always think about the cultivar question as right plant, right place. And I think Mount Cuba Center is a really kind of great example about where cultivars may be appropriate and where they're not appropriate. We have our formal gardens, which are right near the Copeland House here, very formal, very traditional. There's a lot of cultivars present there. And a lot of that is that we know what these plants are going to do. They're as advertised. They're going to give you kind of this uniform look in many cases. And a lot of them are selected for being showier, and they're maybe more appropriate for that setting. When you get into our naturalistic gardens, there are very few cultivars, but straight species from all over the eastern United States. And when you get into our natural lands, it is all straight species, all local ecotypes, and they're almost all seed-grown plants. So I think about those places as, kind of a larger example of what you can do at home. In a restoration situation like the natural lands, you really want those straight species, you want those local genetics, you want those seed-grown plants. If you're gardening in a naturalistic way, sometimes cultivars can look out of place. I tend to garden naturalistic. I have less cultivars at home, but I still do use them, and they tend to be closer to the house. And as I get farther out into I have a few meadows, they tend to be straight species, but they're not all locally native. And if you have a small home landscape, you want to get the most bang for your buck. You really want those big showy things. And I don't think there's anything really wrong with that. I think that's where cultivars maybe make the most sense. The thing that we always come back to at Mount Cuba Center is conservation by addition. By planting any native plant, you are doing a positive, a net positive. You are likely contributing something to the surrounding wildlife, even if that cultivar may not be offering the same level of value as a straight species. And in many cases, we find that to be the case when we're comparing straight species cultivars. The straight species are often kind of the gold standard. They're attracting the most insects. They're the closest to the wild type plant. It makes sense that that's where the value is. But there are other cultivars out there that perform in a very similar way to the straight species. And unfortunately, cultivars it's such a huge topic. It encompasses so many plants. It encompasses plants that are selections of straight species or even seed strains of straight species. So they are, in fact, the straight species that were selected for whatever reason, often because they are more ornamentally attractive to us, but they're not that far removed. There hasn't been that much human influence, not a lot of artificial changes, nothing done in a lab, that kind of stuff. And then on the other end of the spectrum of cultivars, there's complex hybridization, whether that's intentional, found in a garden. We find that those selections with minimal human influence have a lot more value than the cultivars on the other end of the spectrum, where there's a lot of breeding, a lot of selection, particularly when the flower structures are being changed in some fundamental way. So think about, the double hydrangeas, the big mophead hydrangeas, or the double echinaceas. Not a lot of value there. I don't want to say zero, but a lot less than the straight species or the plants that are very similar to the straight species. So it is like, you kind of make those personal decisions as a gardener. I don't think cultivars are appropriate everywhere, but there certainly are cases for them where they do make a lot of sense.
Switch gears a little bit from plants to people. And I can't remember, how long have you been at Mount Cuba?
About 5 years.
Have you seen, as far as your attendance, any change, whether up or down, or the demographics of that, are more, younger, older families, minorities? Maybe COVID changed that a little bit with, people wanting to do more things outside. And then also, again, this is me making an assumption or just a personal observation. I think of Mount Cuba Center as, even though it's obviously plant focused, but it's an educational and research facility versus just a public garden where people kind of come in and, hey, that's a cool looking plant. You have more of a mission there than just a public garden. So right. If you had changes, I guess, in attendance.
Yeah, we're growing rather quickly, actually. And we're trying to figure out, what does that mean for us? We're learning how we can accommodate more people. We actually just built a new parking lot, which was very much needed. If you think about the history of this garden, it was a private estate, and it was built in the 1930s, and it was the home of the Copeland family. And they realized early on that they eventually wanted to invite people to their garden. They wanted this to be a place where, again, going back to that mission, where people could come and be inspired by the beauty and value of native plants. And we've really only opened our doors to the public for regular visitation in 2013. So as far as the age of our institution, it's relatively young. We are very focused in our mission, which I think we tend to attract people who are interested in that as well. Conservation, native plants, what we're known for, and people come to us for that. We have seen a rise in attendance, which is wonderful. More people getting excited about native plants. We're always looking at ways to broaden our audiences, bring more people into Mount Cuba Center, further involvement. One of the things we're working a lot towards right now is increasing accessibility in our gardens, because it was built as a home. A lot of accessibility considerations weren't really a priority at the time, but we're really working hard, especially in the formal gardens right now, to make these more accessible spaces for everybody. We are also trying to do more with our education. We're having remote options as well as in-person options for people who maybe aren't local. There's a lot of considerations that we are taking into account with our growing audiences. We're really trying to make this a place where everyone feels welcome and comfortable, and everyone can kind of take something away from whatever it is that they're interested in at Mount Cuba Center when they come to visit.
I wonder if there are other trial gardens around the country that Mount Cuba has been influenced by, or that you're in regular communication with, and do you share ideas, share data? How does that work?
Yeah, we were inspired heavily by the programs at Chicago Botanic Garden and the work that Richard Hockey is doing there. He is kind of like the pioneer, and he's been doing it a long time. His trial garden there is public. They release public results as well, saying how these plants did. A lot of things at Mount Cuba Center, including how we evaluate these plants from an ornamental perspective, are modeled directly after the work that's been being done at Chicago Botanic. We are in communication at times. We don't really coordinate trials, but it's very interesting. A lot of times when we do trial the same genus of plants, which again isn't necessarily coordinated, it's interesting how often we are finding the same plants performing really well, both in the Chicago region and in the Mid-Atlantic region here. So sometimes a good plant's a good plant, and I think it really kind of shows me that while our research is really kind of targeted towards the Mid-Atlantic, some of our results might have implications kind of beyond, maybe into the Midwest, a little bit into the Southeast and Northeast. It would be wonderful to have more trial gardens like this, in New England and the Southeastern United States, to give those regions a resource as well. I can speak really confidently about our results and how applicable they are to this region. It becomes a little less so because it's just unproven when we're talking to people in New England or in the Southeastern United States. Chicago Botanic Garden is really, they were doing it first, and they were doing a fabulous job. I'm still doing a fabulous job. But Richard has a much broader scope of plants that he works with, not just focused on natives. And we really kind of have that extra layer with the natives of looking at the pollinator interactions as well. I think that is kind of what really differentiates us from that program.
And are you guys also, I assume this is part of the evaluation, but as you were talking about kind of wide swaths of the Eastern United States, many of our USDA planting zones have recently shifted.
Yep.
And so we're seeing in real time, how climate change is impacting our horticultural lives as well as other parts of our lives, of course. But is that part of the evaluation as well, is providing information on how certain plants will do in warmer climates than ours, and in preparation for that in the future, or drier or wetter climates?
Sure. So as far as soil type, we really only are working with one soil type in the trial garden, and it's what we consider average. Again, air quotes, average. It's kind of a clay loam, pH between 6 and 7. We think it applies to kind of a large area of the Mid-Atlantic. Obviously, there are different soil types in the Mid-Atlantic, but if you have similar soil conditions to us and you have full sun or you have shade, you're going to have very similar results to us if you're growing similar plant material. When we are collecting plant material for the trials, there has been a lot of focus on the Southeastern United States in particular. We're bringing in some Southern genetics, trialing it here in the Mid-Atlantic region, seeing if it's cold hardy enough, how it's going to handle these different conditions, potentially different conditions in our trial garden. And it's really interesting how often those plants with Southeastern genetics are doing really well in the trial garden, maybe unexpectedly well. Some of them are just seem to be better adapted to kind of the average garden conditions that we have in the trial garden. But yeah, I doubt it would work from the opposite direction. If we were to bring down northern genetics from New England or northern New England to our trial garden here, I doubt we would see that same level of success. But it's interesting seeing kind of that trend of ornamental material kind of coming from places like Alabama and Georgia and the Carolinas. I think that's a trend we're going to see more and more in the ornamental world, is plants coming from more southern locations and performing really well in areas farther north than where they are normally found.
What do you do as far as pest management in like the trial gardens or any place that's like high visibility as far as like insect, weed, or disease issues, and then carrying that out to your like woodland areas in regards to like invasive plants? Do you have a pest management program, or you try to kind of let things just play out?
Yeah, so in the trial garden, we do almost nothing. No fungicides, really no pest control. And I think for us in the trial garden, diseases are almost a good thing because you can see where there's resistance. Anytime we have a disease issue in the trial garden, talking about things like phlox with powdery mildew, Monarda, same deal. Rust was a major issue with the ironweeds. Whenever those diseases show up in the trial garden, they kind of reach this unsustainable capacity. So there's so many plants that are susceptible that are very close to each other, and things can kind of reach this critical mass really quickly. Infection is very obvious and pretty devastating to some plants in the trial garden, and others, those plants that are completely untouched, those are the plants that we get excited about. Because in a home garden, if you're going to take that plant that's really like bulletproof in the trial garden and put it in your home landscape, it's going to be remarkably clean. It's not going to be experiencing those same levels of disease that it would in the trial garden. So if something's resistant in the trial garden, I'm very confident that it's going to be resistant in your home garden as well. So diseases are actually kind of a good thing from that perspective. There are some diseases that we do worry about a little bit. Aster yellows is one of them. I'm not sure that there's any plants that are truly resistant in the Asteraceae family. I think some plants just show the symptoms and signs a little more than others. So that's one of the reasons that we're actually, as far as how we choose trials, we are thinking of one of the ways that we do choose those trials are trying to rotate through plant families so we don't develop any huge levels of diseases like Aster yellows, and we can get, give Asteraceae a break, give the mint family a little bit of time, rotate in some grasses, and kind of break that cycle, kind of like you would in an agricultural system. In the greater Mount Cuba Center gardens, naturalistic and formal, pest control is handled through our IPM team, and it's kind of, we try to use the lowest impact treatments possible. Now, there are some issues, like we have southern blight, which is a fungal disease that's pretty devastating to the gardens, but we're working through various treatment strategies and different chemicals that are a lot more ecologically friendly to try to handle those infections. IPM, I think, would also apply to deer. So we have a management team, a management strategy outside of the deer fence as well to try to give our natural areas a little bit of a break and try to allow those forests to regenerate naturally, which is not happening at the moment just because of those high deer numbers. But yeah, it's all part of it, but we do try to be as gentle and as sustainable as possible in any of those treatments. But those treatments are almost never used or haven't been used in my time in the trial garden.
And one last comment for me. Just wanted to say congratulations when I was reading up on your background that you were one of Greenhouse Product News's 40 under 40 for 2023. So that's
thank you.
A nice recognition.
Yeah, it's an honor.
The work that you've been doing.
Thank you.
I did just want to, and we're getting kind of close to the end of our time together, but I did want to spend a couple minutes talking about Carex.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
I feel like this is a plant that's I'm starting to see more people talk about, and we just hosted a big green industry conference in the Philly area at the beginning of January, and had a really great talk from John Mark Courtney up at
oh yeah, he's
Kinder,
great. Sorry.
about just
yeah.
about sedges.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I know why I like sedges, but why do a whole part of the trial on Carex, and what's so great about them, I guess?
I think I get really excited about Carex, and I'm so glad to see that there's that excitement is catching on and more people are using them, that growers I'm hoping are getting more demand for Carex as well. They're just super versatile plants, and there really is a Carex for any garden situation. I think people tend to think about Carex growing in like wet, shady areas, and that's true for some species. But there are other Carex that grow in sunny, hot sun and sandy, dry soils. There are Carex that are appropriate for almost any garden condition. They cover ground. Some of them are just beautiful on their own. They're just wonderful plants. And through our trials, we actually found that they're very tolerant of conditions that are maybe outside of their wild, where you would find them in the wild. We compared, I believe it was 70 different Carex in full sun and in shade. We found a lot of these plants did really well in both. So they can be used as kind of this unifying feature. If you have a shady bed right next to a full sun bed, you can use plants like Carex cherokeensis to tie those designs together. I think they're beautiful, endlessly fascinating. If you're someone who's interested in details, getting into the Carex flowers and the perigynia, and the Carex seeds, it's just like, it's so cool. But they're a really cool group, extremely low maintenance. We didn't touch these things for 5 years in the trial garden, and they did beautifully, at least the top performing ones. And we even mowed some of them in the last year of the evaluation. We found that some of them could actually be a good replacement for turf grass lawns in certain situations. I think they could be particularly valuable in areas where turf grass might have a difficult time establishing, thinking about like dry shade. There's some Carex that would be a really good fit for that if people want that turf grass aesthetic or just want a ground cover underneath, like, the root zone of a maple. There are some Carex out there that could do that really, really well. So versatile group, beautiful group, incredibly diverse group as well. It's just, Carex are great. And kind of following off Carex, we actually just planted a fern trial, which I think is going to have some, I'm similarly excited about because they have similar garden utility as well.
Yeah, it's nice to focus on those plants that are a little understated, but have a big role to play, especially in conditions that are trickier for other native plants. So really excited to see more about the fern trial as well.
Me too.
The Carex report is up on the Mount Cuba website, so folks can take a look at that. And I know, Tim and I think at this point are raring to come visit on April 3rd when you guys open.
Yep.
So we'll look forward to that. So before we go, Sam, what do you like to do when you're not working?
Oh my gosh. I love being outside. Being outside with the kids and the family, that's a huge part of it. I like to have an artistic outlet. I like drawing and painting, those kinds of things. Cooking. I guess that's that's me. Other than just gardening at home, which is another big time sink that I just thoroughly enjoy. I take a lot of the lessons learned from the trial garden and I apply them at home, and I've been just kind of blown away by the increase in insect species and birds that I'm seeing at home. And it's just so exciting to see this working. It's true. Like if you plant it, they will come. Planting more milkweeds at home, sharing the monarch caterpillars with my daughter and seeing her get excited about it. That's the best. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell at home.
Well, it's great to hear that you're not done with plants by the time you get home. And
no, certainly not. Certainly not.
Cool. That's great to hear. Well, Sam, thank you so much for being on the show. It was so great talking with you. And we look forward to visiting Mount Cuba, seeing the trial gardens and seeing some of these really cool plants that you're evaluating. So
absolutely. And if I can put in a shameless plug, I just wanted to let everyone know that the Amsonia trial is coming. I think it's going to be live on our website on February 13th. So you can download the research report for free. Spoiler alert, all of the Amsonia are great plants. So a little bit more background on the genus and the plants that we trialed. It was actually a 10-year trial, so our longest trial ever. Wow. So take a look at that on the 13th. And yes, we do open the 3rd, but we have a lot of educational opportunities on our website any time of the year.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Sam.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care.